Hi, this is Phil Cooke, and today we're going to be talking to Brian Dodd. His website, Brian Dodd on Leadership, is an incredibly popular website. Every week it features some of the best articles out there on leadership. It's a great aggregate site, and he's written some amazing books on leadership. So it's going to be an exciting interview, and I want you to stay tuned because we're going to be talking about his new book. I'll wait and tell you about it when we get into the interview, so stay tuned. Brian Dodd, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. I've followed you for a long time. You've been gracious enough to post some of my articles on your amazing leadership blog, and so I'm thrilled that you're here.
Well, Phil, look, this is a treasure for me. Also, I've loved your work for years. I think you have a very unique voice in the Christian community, particularly as it relates to entertainment and arts and things of that nature. If I can use this term, been a big fan of your work for quite a while. I'll tell you a funny thing. This is just going to help you. I've just become aware of your planner. So I've checked out your planner. I'm going to be buying your planner here in the next day or two.
You may not realize this, but being a guest on my podcast makes you eligible for a free planner. So no problem. We'll take care of that.
That's great. So yeah, it's a thrill to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's go back a little bit in your story. Before we start talking about your new book, tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole leadership thing to begin with.
Yeah, kind of goes back to when I was young. I came from a very dysfunctional family. I mean, you start walking through the abuses, physical, sexual, mental. I mean, me, my brother and sister experienced them all. Okay.
Wow.
So in 1978, my dad, left the house, and my mom was like, okay, I need my kids to have some level of stability. We're going to start going to church. And she looked at me. I was the oldest and angriest of the three kids. And she goes, Brian, we'll go wherever you want to go. And my three best friends were Mark Nettles, Chuck Black, and Tim Price. Wherever they were going is where I was going. Okay. And so that happened to be a church called Ackworth United Methodist Church. Ackworth, at the time, 1978, was a 2 red light town 30 minutes north of Atlanta. And urban sprawl has now sucked it in. So it's now part of Atlanta. But yeah, we started going. Bottom line, I was still an angry kid. But that church loved me unconditionally. My Sunday school teacher played a big part in my life. And I gave my life to Christ. So funny thing, I was Christian maybe 1 or 2 weeks. And Lennis Black, Chuck's dad, was my Sunday school teacher. And I loved Mr. Black. And he goes, hey, a bunch of us are going to be praying for Pastor Jim before the service. Why don't you come and join us? And because Mr. Black said so, the power of influence, I'm like, sure. And so we go in there, and all these people that are praying for Pastor Jim, the only people in the room were Mr. Black, me, and Pastor Jim. So I don't even know there was an Old and New Testament. I just know I was blind, but now I see. Okay.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Mr. Black prays first. I just repeat everything he says. But here's the interesting thing, Phil. I did not realize it at the time. It's one of those you can only connect the dots looking back. That moment propelled me that I would spend the rest of my life serving pastors and church leaders.
Wow.
And, later on, we'll fast forward about 12 years. I'm a youth pastor. And my pastor at the time comes up to me and, he goes, Brian, you're doing a great job. Kids love you. Parents love you. Your department's growing. But if you don't learn to build a team, you're going to burn out. And he goes, there's this new book out called Developing the Leaders Around You by John Maxwell.
Yep.
And I want you to read it, and I want you to do everything it says. Well, unbeknownst to me, that was my first entree and my introduction into what we would classify as Christian leadership content and all. Wow. So, that began the journey, and I just got more consumed in it, more traction, exposed to more resources. And a dream of mine happened in 2002, where I actually got to go to work for John Maxwell at Enjoy Stewardship Solutions. So
Yep.
the last 21 years, I've been serving pastors in leadership development and fundraising. And birthed out of that has, been the books and the podcast and the blog and all of those type of things. So it all started with my mom wanting her children to have some level of stability and a Sunday school teacher investing in my life.
That's fantastic. Well, it's also fun to, it's amazing the influence John Maxwell has had on leadership in my lifetime. I mean, I've got all of his books. I've met him multiple times. We've spoken together at a couple conferences, and it was, I remember when he was a pastor and he left the church to launch into this whole crazy leadership thing. And lo and behold, he's had I just think remarkable impact out there. So it's interesting that the first book you read on leadership, you ended up working with that guy.
Yeah, totally happenstance, totally God's providence. It was a book given to me by my pastor. And I was the classic kid out of college who'll never read a book again. I was that kid. But yep. Fortunately, John's content's very easily consumable, was then, is today. And that set me on a trajectory that literally changed my life.
Now, your website, Brian Dodd on Leadership, is really amazing because every week you go out and find the top 10 most interesting leadership posts you can find and post it on your site. I mean, I've learned so much. It's just a great aggregate site for finding really the most cutting edge articles on leadership out there. How did you come up with that idea? How did you start that? How old has that been?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about that, Phil, some things you stumble upon. And there's this word now that, okay, the influences are the aggregators. You hear that a lot now.
Yes.
Well, mine was not any kind of strategic plan. As a writer, you're always looking for good content.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned, and John Maxwell did teach me this, is that as a Christian leader, you should always be pointing to other people. Look at what God's doing over there. Look at what God's doing in their life, and just help tell other people's stories. And so that was kind of ingrained into my DNA. So on Fridays, it's just a good way to wrap up the week. Yeah. I did it once or twice, but it turned out to be extremely popular. And so I just now do it every Friday. I do my top 10 posts I read during the week. I never do one author 2 weeks in a row. That's why you'll see your stuff every other week, for instance.
One of the things I like about it, by the way, is you pull from sports, you pull from business, you pull from church and nonprofit worlds. It's just such an interesting cross section of leadership techniques from a lot of different perspectives, and that's fascinating to me.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, I've got a bent towards Christian leadership. Obviously.
Sure.
But there are people, I used to, for lack of a better phrase, all truth comes from God. Some people stumble upon it in the dark.
Yes.
And there are some unbelievable leadership writers and experts out there who aren't Christian, but their concepts are so applicable. And if you've got, I'll call it any kind of biblical wherewithal or imagination or connectivity or anything like that, you can say, oh, like I read an article this week by the Daily Coach written by Mike Lombardi. Yep. And he talked about, and I know you're not a sports fan, so I don't stay here long, but he talked about the fallacy of the Philadelphia Sixers, the process.
Yeah.
Genius article that's applicable to any leader in any area of discipline when it comes to creating culture and what you need to be a success. Well, at the time of this taping, this Friday's top 10, it's going to be one of the top 10. And every pastor should read that. It's just a genius article. So yeah, I try to, I don't read salacious stuff or R-rated stuff or anything like that. But yeah, if it's down the middle of the road, I'll learn from anybody.
No kidding. That's a great idea. And so out of all this, you've written your new book, Mighty, which is 7 skills you need to move from pandemic to progress. Tell me about how that came about. Yeah.
So it's funny. I wrote a book called 2021, The Year in Leadership, which it was Phil, there's a great lesson out of this for all content creators and book writers, but it was the
Yeah.
book I always wanted to write. It just captured all my best articles for an entire 12-month period. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the problem with that, in terms of it getting out to the audience and things of that nature, it sold very, very well in January, February, and March, and then just kind of fell off a cliff, you know.
Yeah.
But there was one article I wrote on David's Mighty Men that's in that book. So it's about 2 or 3 pages in that book. Well, I would get asked to speak at certain events. And if it was a Christian event, I would speak on that because I love David's Mighty Men. And
Yeah.
if it was a secular event like a business association or a company, I would classify it as a great military leader. You know,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
how I would position it. Well, Phil, it's the infamous comedian who goes to a small nightclub to try things out before
Yep.
he gets on a large stage.
Yep.
It was very, very well received, and I even had people tell me, Brian, this has legs. It's your next book. And so what happened is the 7 skills are the 7. If you read David's Mighty Men in 2 Samuel 23, it's the 7 skills that those individuals had. But then
Okay.
what I did is I built a biblical framework for those 7 skills. But then, similar to 2021, the year in leadership,
Yeah.
I bring in stories from 2022, articles that I've written, and just position them in each of the 7 buckets, and then just edit it and tie it together. I love this book. I thought 2021 was the book I always wanted to write. It's turned out to be this one because I can use it for any audience. It's an encouragement to people. And Phil, here's the number one lesson I learned for all creatives on this book. It's the 4th book I've ever written. Okay, the 4th one.
Yep.
The first book I wrote, I just wanted my name on something. I mean, I wanted to create something. I wanted that if you go to the Library of Congress, you're reading my name.
Yep.
I just wanted my name on something. Okay. The second book I wrote, which is called Timeless, it was a study of, I had a question in my mind. Are there traits and characteristics of the greatest leaders of all time, regardless of industry or area of discipline?
Yeah.
All the way back to Bible days to modern days. So best pastors, best coaches, best business leaders, best churches, best of the best. And I did.
Yeah.
I discovered 10 common traits they all had. So my second book, Timeless, that was really an answer to a question I had. It's a research project, basically. Third book was the book I always wanted to write. Fourth book, though, I even got it in the title, 7 Skills You Need. Mighty is the first book, Phil, I ever wrote for other people.
Interesting.
And here's
go ahead. Don't let me interrupt you.
Here's the interesting thing about it, and this is what I want to tell all creatives. I love all 4 books. They're like your kid.
Yep.
You love
Sure.
them, okay? But Mighty was the first book that in its genre was ever an Amazon #1 bestseller. The others weren't, but this one is. And Phil, what I apply that to is obviously some momentum and stacking things upon each other.
Yeah.
But the main reason is it was for other people. It was for the audience. I obviously I've got my voice and what I want to talk about, but this book was really for other people. And God just honored that it was that generosity, that
Yep.
service to others. And God really honored that, and the audience responded pretty well. So,
Well, moving from pandemic to progress got my attention because
Yeah.
I've dealt with so many pastors in particular recently who are still struggling after the pandemic. And
Mhm.
I spoke to an African-American denomination just day before yesterday on a big conference that they had. And so many of those pastors were really struggling because the Black community got hit really hard with
Right.
COVID, and people are hesitating to come back, and a lot of churches have closed. And so give me a couple principles. Tell me some things that would help me as a leader, particularly if my crew is struggling, if my church is struggling. How am I, is there hope? Can I get over, can we get over this pandemic business and actually get back into normal operation? What would you encourage me with?
Yeah. So actually, the answer is yes. There is hope, and you can come back. I'll address all seven. All seven skills are important, but for the example you just gave, when I talk to
Yeah.
pastors, the skill on that one is faith. Because if you read David's Mighty Men, there are two verses, and it's in Samuel 23. One's in verse 10 and one's in verse 12. And it says, and the Lord gave them the victory. Okay, so one of the seven skills is faith. Here's what I've learned. And interestingly, Phil, I have a unique job in terms of helping pastors with fundraising and leadership development.
Right.
In fact, I only deal with growing churches. It's a very unique job.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for it. It's nothing that, if God removes the job, I lose it. I probably, no joke, um, probably have more daily one-on-one, not a conference where you're speaking to a lot of people, but
Right.
one-on-one conversations with pastors of growing churches than anybody in America. If not, I'm in the top 10. It's just the nature of the job. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's what I would tell pastors. COVID stripped away all non-essentials. If you think that growing a church, if you can get the right band or the right video or the right hazer or the opulence or anything of
Right.
that nature, there might have been a time that drew a crowd. Okay. Um, does the attractional church model still work? Well, yes and no. No, in everything I just said, but people are still dramatically attracted to something. And what it is, the thing about a growing church today, it's not what you do, it's who you are.
Mm.
Because if you're a person that you say, Lord, I want to honor you with my life. I want to honor you with our message on Sunday. I want to teach the scriptures the way they're written out. I want to be fundamentally and theologically accurate. I want to talk about sin in a way that, doesn't harm people or turn people off, but does, tell them the truth and bring about an area of conviction. And
Yeah.
Lord, we're going to be about your business, and we're going to honor and glorify everything you do. And we're going to exalt the name of Jesus above everything else. People are lining up to go to those churches.
Interesting.
And, because every time I talk to a growing church, I'll say, depending on what you're reading, 85% of churches are plateaued or declining. Another 10 or 11% are growing, but not as fast as their city. So they're not making a huge dent. But there's 4% that are really doing something incredibly miraculous and significant. And I'll tell the pastor, you're either one of the 15% or you're one of the 4%. And I'll go, it's obviously the goodness of God, but tell me what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, Phil, the common thread on all of that, they'll go, Brian, look, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to implement the systems and we want to deliver things with excellence and we want to serve our community. Fact of the matter is, we're just trying to be true to the scriptures, honor God in everything we do, and we don't know where these people are coming from. Pastors of growing churches
Yeah.
are some of the most humble people I've ever
True.
met. You would think it'd be the opposite. You'd think they'd be rock stars, that it's the exact opposite. God really does honors the humble and opposes the proud.
Yeah.
And so here's what I tell pastors. You want to plan for church growth, deliver a 1980s message wrapped in 2000s excellence.
That's great. That's a good line. That's a good line.
You still have to have excellence. People are not going to put up with a lack of excellence.
Yeah.
But you give a theological, fundamental 1980s message, but wrap it in the context of today's culture. Yeah, you're going to grow God's going to do something significant in your church.
Well, I wrote a blog post not long ago on churches should be who they are. So many, I saw this, especially this past Christmas, when little churches are trying to be like big churches. So they bring in the fog machine, but they don't have anybody that knows how to operate it. So I was at one Christmas program where the singer started choking and had to walk off the stage because there was just so much fog. Or they get fancy lights, or they get too big an orchestra and they don't really know how to manage that or control it. They're trying so hard to be like the mega church down the street. And I'll never forget. I took my family to a resort in Upper New York State years ago,
Uh-huh.
and and we spent Christmas there. And it was at a secular, it's a resort, but they offered a little church service on the site, and a local pastor came in, and there was only maybe 30 or 40 people that showed up for it. But he knew exactly how to deliver a powerfully compelling service. And he wasn't trying to be somebody else. He wasn't trying to be different. He was just delivering. He just was preaching boldly. And it was an amazing experience. So I think you're exactly right. I'm a media guy. So I'm all about the social media presence and the web presence and video and all that stuff. However, if it's not all wrapped up in a powerful message and you're not preaching a biblically focused message, it's not worth it. It's going to fail.
Yeah, I completely agree, Phil. And here's what I'd say too about this topic. When somebody comes to your church or they visit your church and they're sitting out there in the crowd and they're coming out of the pandemic,
Yeah.
here's what they're thinking. They're thinking, they may or may not have lost loved ones during the pandemic. They may or may not have lost their job. It was certainly hanging by a thread. Okay.
Yeah.
They probably had marital strife, probably had strife with their families over mask or something of that nature.
Yeah.
They're dealing with all this uncertainty. They're dealing with, how do we put our life back together? Racial strife, political strife. What happens if my kid wants to transition? These are the issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And if they walk into a room and somebody stands on that platform and they tell them what God thinks about the issues of their life, they will line up for that all day long, because then you're giving them the hope and the strategy for their life and the biblical principles to live a God honoring life that COVID did everything it could to strip from them.
That's
So,
fantastic.
yeah, so you and I 100% agreement on that.
Well, this wasn't in my plan today, but based on your experience and the hundreds of pastors you've worked with over the years,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest leadership mistakes that you see out there?
Yeah. So leadership mistakes, if I had to classify, I'll give you 4 fast ones and I'll hit them.
Okay.
And I'll hit them fast too. So number one, vision. Where there is no vision, people perish. I mean, and so when I teach vision, I teach, you want it clear, crisp, and compelling. You want it to be very clear about, where we're going and what we're doing. You want it to be repeatable. Because if I go see somebody and I say, hey, will you come to church with me? And they're like, yeah, sure. What's your church about? Okay, I need to repeat it.
Yeah.
And compelling means I'm willing to give my life to it. Okay.
That's good.
Next thing, I'll lump it under an umbrella term called project, but that could be community involvement. That could be discipleship, whatever your church is about, your core values, your mission, vision, that type of thing. This is why our church exists. This is our unique biblical address in the city that God has planted us.
Okay.
So you got to be very clear about that. Third, leadership. You want the leaders in your church publicly and privately supporting the ministry initiatives. And here's the big one, Phil. You want your leaders, we'll call them elders, session, council, deacons, lay leaders, ad hoc, nursery workers, volunteers. You want your leaders answering questions, not asking them. Because that way they can then multiply mission, vision. And then finally, trust. How do you build trust as a pastor? I line it up with David and Goliath. David slayed the bear, slayed the lion, now bring on Goliath. The way you gain trust as a pastor is wise and timely decisions over an extended period of time. And then when the Goliath issue comes, they'll trust you because they've seen you slay the bears and the lions. I am actually on vision, Bill, changing my mind a little bit on something.
Okay.
Okay. When we think of vision, we think of a 1, 3, 5 year plan, strategic plan. This is where we're going, 1, 3, 5 year plan. And those are good. They provide a North Star for the congregation. They provide guardrails. They enable you to say no to certain things and yes to certain things. But I think for a church in a post-COVID world, vision is what you see, feel, and hear on Sunday, compounded and multiplied over 12, 36, and 60 months. Let me give you an example. So my wife just retired as a receptionist where we were going to church. So we started attending another church, because you're always that whole staff thing.
Right.
So we're attending another church by Mike Lynch, ironically, the pastor that wrote the foreword to Mighty. Okay.
Okay.
Mike's an incredible pastor. So this past Sunday, and I told him this, I said, I drove up on your campus and the parking team was all strategically placed. It was a full team. And the leader of the parking team was out front, and they had what I call elbows, go down this lane, turn here, turn here. And they had the people at the elbows guiding you in. Then we came up to a tent outside where they were giving away bags so that you could give groceries and serve the poor and under-resourced, because school provides lunches for a lot of kids. And when school lets out, those kids don't have lunch.
Yeah.
So we're providing lunches to the local, shelter that does that. And a staff person was there as well. Incredible volunteers, stopping traffic that was lined up to let us, cross certain ways.
Yeah.
And then a staff person welcomed us in. I said, Mike, I have no idea what your 1, 3, and 5 year plan is. But here's what I know about North Star Church. You're a church that if you come here, you're going to find meaning and purpose in your life. You're going to discover your spiritual gifts and have the opportunity to do that within a team and community of other people and live out God's purposes and plans as you serve people in our church. And not only are you going to do that, you're going to get to serve the poor and under-resourced and make a difference in our community. And we're going to have more and more people coming to our church to experience the joy and excitement of what God's doing here. And the staff's going to lead the way and be a picture of the desired destination at which other people wish to arrive.
Wow.
I said, I got all that in 2 minutes.
I love it.
So I think vision, Phil, I think we need to elevate what you see, Phil, and hear on Sunday and elevate that up to an equal or even higher place than a 1, 3, or 5 year strategic plan.
Yeah. That's good. It's funny you say that because I may violate your standards here, but I'm not a big mission statement guy.
Okay.
In most churches I go to, nonprofit organizations, ministry organizations, they have they spend months coming up with a mission statement. Then they frame it and put it on the wall, and then nobody in the organization knows what it is. If you ask a typical church staff member or a nonprofit staff member, what's your mission statement? They have no clue. So It's just something you stash away. But what you're talking about is visible, real stuff. I wrote a blog post just recently on my experience at Shepherd Church in Porter Ranch here in Los Angeles. Dudley Rutherford is the pastor. Mm-hmm. And it was the same parking lot experience. It was amazing. These guys were incredible. And as my wife and I parked, and we walked in past 4 or 5 of the parking lot guys, even though they were in the middle of parking cars, every single one of them welcomed me to church. They encouraged me. And the last guy, he even knew the sermon series that the pastor was on and told me all about it and told me, man, today is the day. You are so fortunate you're here today. And I'll tell you, by the time I got to my seat, I was ready to rock. And then going out, they did the opposite. They all wished us a great week, and it was really encouraging. That those practical, hands-on, simple things, they just mean a lot to people.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I think I know the answer before I ask, and there's going to be a deep meaning behind it.
Okay.
As friendly, those people are incredibly friendly, very proactive, very educated, very excited about, what the church is doing. Is Dudley the same way?
Oh yeah, completely, 100%. Right. Yeah, he's over the top.
So here's the thing. For lack of a better phrase, the uneducated or simplistic thought process to what you and I have just done the last few minutes is to think we've just talked about a parking team.
Yes.
This is a classic example, my story and your story, that people are a picture of the leader. True. And that parking experience, as a visitor, I already know what I'm going to get on the stage because I've experienced it in the parking.
Yes.
People are we've been talking about culture. That's basically what you and I are talking about. But that's the power of volunteerism. That's the power of a first impressions team. That's the power of leadership. So that's that's the thing that I got. And we spend so much time on all those things. But yeah, people are a picture of the leader, and our stories represent that.
And it trickles down from the leader. Everything trickles down from the leader. So you're exactly right. And I've been in churches that the church really does reflect the personality and the enthusiasm and the commitment and calling of the pastor.
Right.
And that's what leadership is all about in many ways. So I think that's really fantastic. So tell me this. Tell me about all things Brian Dodd. Where do we find your website? How do we find your books? Tell me everything I need to know.
Yeah, without a doubt. So Brian Dodd on leadership, and Brian is Brien, and my Southern accent always gets me in trouble. Dodd is D-O-D as in David, D as in David, because they'll go Brian Dobb, Brian Dobson. Yeah. So it's Brian Dodd.
We'll put it in the show notes just so everybody's clear. But we'll
take care of me,
Phil.
Take care of me. So, but yeah, BrianDoddOnLeadership.com. I've done 2 coaching courses. They're on there. You can get the books there. The books kind of do links like straight to Amazon. So, I know how you feel about Amazon too. By the way, one of the best posts I read during the year of 2022 was your post on Amazon.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, bottom line, Amazon, you can get all my books. And yeah, if I've not been able to invest in you through my content, be it the website or the books or the coaching course, yeah, I'd love to serve you in those capacities and just add value to you in your leadership.
Well, we also have a lot of pastors that listen to this. What about the work you're doing with Enjoy? How do we get in touch with you about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a contact form on my website. You could contact me right through there. Or if you want to talk to me, if your church has a need to raise, significant capital, new building, debt retirement, relocation, renovations is what we're doing a ton of post-COVID, because people came back to church and they're like, okay, we got to fix this thing.
Yeah,
we got to update it. And also, if you want to increase weekly giving, so you can go to Brian D, which is my first name and first letter of my last name, at enjoystewardship.com. Enjoy is INJOY. And yeah, if you've got a need coming up, I would love to talk with you about that and just see if we could serve you in any capacity in that area.
That's fantastic. And Mighty is the new book. I think I just love the principle of it being based on David's mighty men. It's just a great concept.
And here's what I would tell all pastors and church leaders. And here was my dream for the book. So at the end of each chapter is a series of discussion questions. So that way, Mighty is a great book. You'll love it individually. But it's really a book not written to be done alone. It can serve that purpose, but a pastor can do it with their staff with their lay leaders, business leaders with their teams at their jobs, coaches with their players, on the movie set or something like that. You can do it with your crew. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to pick up copies and use it. Don't read the book alone. Read it with your teams and discuss it. And you'll help develop a leadership culture in whatever area of discipline you may be in.
Well, I wish more leaders taught leadership to their church or their business or their team. And this is a great tool for doing that. So thank you for that. That's a brilliant idea. And I would encourage every leader out there watching, use that as a resource to really sit down with your team and teach them the principles that you've learned over the years on how to be an effective leader. I think it's so important. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being a part of this. I just love your website, and I'm very grateful that you'd post my stuff every once in a while. I'm really honored that you do that. And thank you for all the work you're doing out there. And by the way, let me close this with just saying one last thing. And that is that you have a line on your website. I wrote it down that your site takes the everyday life experiences we all have and processes them in the light of leadership. Yeah. Give me an explanation of what that means, because I love that line.
Okay. So I'm from the John Maxwell tree. Okay. Studied his stuff, worked for him. I'm from the John Maxwell tree. I can even tell you specifically what branch I'm from. And that in the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership is the law of intuition.
Yeah.
So everybody evaluates, everything through a leadership bias. So that's why I write things on sports, and I write things on business, and I write things on Christian leadership. And that's why I process pulling up to a car and walking into a building as an example of Mike Lynch's leadership at North Star Church. Saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3 this week. And, I'll write a little thing on it. I'll talk about, if you've not seen the movie, one of the things is it's Rocket's origin story. So everyone has a story, and every story has value, and every story is important. Well, that's a leadership principle that I extract from Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So really, Phil, my website is a combination, Evernote and diary, of everyday experiences that I see and feel and stories I find interesting. And I just put it in a leadership context and write it in a way that other people can extract the principles as well. Number one, enjoy the post. But number two, it also be informative and give them tools and handles that'll make them a better leader. So yeah, that's what that statement means. And that's why I write what I write and how I write it. So,
well, we'll put all the information in the show notes for how to get your books, your website, all your courses, your things like that. And I'm grateful that you come on. Thank you so much, because I am a big believer that pastors need more leadership training than ever. And you're a great source for that. So thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Well, Phil, it's been a pleasure. And look, I think we talked about this offline, but I do want to say it. I've been an admirer of you and your work for several years. And I think God's just given you a unique voice in a unique space. I admire your courage when you write courageous articles. And I'm thrilled that God has you where he has you. And we are all better leaders, and we are all better people because you show up to work every day. So thank you for that.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you so much. And thanks for being a part of the podcast. Brian mentioned my planner, the unique planner, the ultimate planner for creative professionals. I created this myself, laid out the design, and you can get a copy by going to my website, philcooke.com, Cooke with an E, and ordering it from us, or a gift to our nonprofit, the Influence Lab, would be the greatest way. If you can donate a gift towards the work we're doing training Christian media professionals around the world, that would go a long way. We would just be incredibly grateful. And it means so much because we have so many requests from India, Africa, even pastors in Russia, which is going through such a difficult time right now inside that country, Asia, South America. We're just getting requests all the time to take teams down and teach them how to use digital media, social media, video more effectively. And your donation to the Influence Lab helps us do that. So if you give us a donation, you can pick the books that we'll send you, but that unique planner is available, and we'd love to send you a copy because it's laid out for an entire year, and it'll help you plan your day to be most productive. And it's really designed for creative people. I wanted a planner that wasn't, so complicated people had to spend an hour every day filling it out. It was just really brief and to the point, and help launch their day in an incredibly creative way. So that's what the unique creative planner is all about. Visit us at theinfluencelab.com or philcooke.com, and we'll get a copy out to you right away. Thanks so much.